welcome back. I'm joined now by Dr. Keith Smith, the co-founder of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, a state-of-the-art multi-specialty facility owned and operated by 40 of the top surgeons and anesthesiologists in central Oklahoma. Dr. Smith is a pioneer in free market medicine, and I'm happy to welcome him once again to the program. Welcome to the Power and Market Report. Dr. Smith, how are you?
I'm good, Albert. Thanks for having me once again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And we haven't spoken in several months, but I have been following your video blog on YouTube, and there have been some very interesting discussions, and I'll alert the viewers to that at the end with a link. But you've been doing this video blog for some time now, and one of your entries spurred a little bit of a conversation both on your Facebook, I think, and also on the YouTube. And that was a post you made about why one shouldn't trust a broker, and I think you were talking about a health insurance broker. What exactly did you say, and why did people get so upset? Some people.
Well, I started the video blog with a story about one of my employees who was an insurance broker before she came to work for me as a scrub tech. And she described a fella who came in to buy an insurance product, and when he left, and as soon as the door was closed, there were a lot of high fives and people jumping up and down and doing hip and chest bumps, because what he had been sold was not a policy that best met his needs, but what he'd been sold actually was a policy that rendered the highest commission and override, and that is exactly what's going on in healthcare, and people that are buying and businesses that are dealing with big carriers oftentimes are being sold a service that is not the best thing for the client, but is really the best thing for the brokerage that the broker represents. So I think the reason it got such a crazy response was the way it was packaged. It just said, "Don't trust your broker." And there are good guy brokers out there, but there really is, I think, a compelling argument for trust and verify, and make sure that people shop around and they take advantage of what little is left of the competitive marketplace in insurance, particularly for businesses that are buying.
Yeah, now on the one hand, I have no doubt that what you're saying is true, that this story, that the way she recollected it, I have no problem seeing that happened. At the same time, this is not specific or exclusive to the health insurance industry, right? Brokers of all sorts have been accused and are guilty of doing similar, engaging in similar practices. And the one example that comes to mind is that from the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know if you saw that, but just financial brokers are notorious for luring their clients in, selling them high commission products. Insurance products are particularly bad. I mean, crazy commissions on insurance products. We all know about car salesmen and what they do with the financing. So this is really just a buyer beware message. And you use the example of healthcare because you're a physician, but I don't see this as being specific to only medical or health insurance brokers at all.
And that, of course, puts in context how virulent the response was that I received on that video blog. The only case I made was, I thought, a compelling case that people should look at healthcare insurance brokers in exactly the way they look at anybody else that's selling them anything, and that they should be aware and educated, and they should beware. But the response, because it's attached to healthcare, which is really the only thing I know anything about. I leave the rest to experts like you. But the idea that a health insurance broker might not act in the interest of their client when the incentives are absolutely aligned to reward the broker for not necessarily acting in the interest of their client, the response to that, I think, was an emotional one, because it really did hit a nerve.
This is very interesting, actually, because it basically steers us in a different direction, and that is, what is it about the medical industry that's special? People will have no problem believing, in fact, they want to believe that their stockbroker is ripping them off. They have no problem with that. They want to believe that the car salesman is there to rip them off.
Right.
When you start talking about your real estate broker or agent, they get really upset.
Right.
And when you talk about healthcare, they get really upset. So somehow, the real estate industry and the healthcare industry have achieved special status, and somehow they're immune to the forces of greed and deception and things that just happen everywhere.
And I think part of the reason in the healthcare industry and the reason I got the reaction I did is that there's this huge group of people in a sector called human resources. And really, it's their job to vet and to ferret out the dishonest brokers. But many of them are doing business with brokers that are dishonest. And I think just the fear that this would be discovered or revealed or found out would show that many of the human resource people are really not actually performing their job and not vetting these people out. And I think that's part of the reason that this is so threatening to so many people, because there's so many people that have their fingers in the healthcare pie that really don't deliver much value at all.
You know, that's interesting, because it brings to mind something else, and I actually don't expect you to have the answer to this, and I don't. But if that's the case, then I would expect them to be equally sensitive about the issue of 401ks and how sometimes those have been accused of being just transfers of wealth and high fees and ripoffs in general. Do you know anything about that?
I really don't. I've always thought it was interesting, though, that the federal government allowed people to purchase products from Wall Street with pre-tax money, but they won't let people buy health care with pre-tax money. And, it's a very interesting prioritization of subsidies from the federal government, and that really is my only comment to that. That's never made sense to me.
Yeah, I guess you have to get there early with your lobby, right? And perhaps that'll happen sometime. I mean, it's a pretty strong lobby now, the way the consolidation that's going on.
Well, they grant tax exempt status to all these hospitals that are receiving the money. They ought to give some consideration to granting tax exempt status to those who are having to pay these crazy bills the hospitals give out.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. I want to move on to Obamacare because recently, I forget who it was, but it was a politician or someone seeking the nomination, I think, talked about Obamacare and the way that basically this is just trending toward single payer, single provider, and it's almost inevitable. This is something that you said at least 2 years ago. I forget when it was when I first spoke with you, but you were very vocal and very early with this message that this is Obamacare is not the end. Obamacare is a means to an end. Do you still stand by that? Do you see that actually happening, and how far, if so, how far away do you think we are?
Yeah, I don't remember. It's probably 5 years ago. I think that I made that prediction, but it was very clear. You can search the internet or YouTube for just type in Barney Frank and single payer, and he was caught off guard. A very rare moment for Barney Frank because he's a very brilliant man. But he was caught in an off-guard moment when he declared Obamacare is the best way to get to single payer, that being their ultimate goal. So it wasn't any sort of clairvoyance or any on my part. I mean, I was just listening to what they were saying. But the Unaffordable Care Act was very specifically designed to result in industry consolidation. And my friend Jim Epstein at Reason Magazine has told me that anytime you see industry consolidation, the hand of bribery and government corruption is always nearby, because that's not the natural order of things. The natural order of things is for more competitors to enter the marketplace and create better and more refined and more efficient products and services. So what we've seen since the implementation of Obamacare is a consolidation of hospitals, of physician practices, of insurance companies, you name it, and that ultimately is the intention. So if you go from a whole bunch of companies that are providing health insurance, and now you basically have three, what's next? One, I think it is headed and that is the government's goal, is for it not necessarily to look like Canada, where the government is the actual payer, but more of a fascist or crony sort of setup where a where a single insurance company is granted a government contract, or maybe there's another one close by in line that will outbid with whatever campaign contributions are necessary to get that contract. So I think ultimately that's what they hope it will look like. The good news is government never gets anything right, and they're fouling up the implementation of Obamacare and this goal towards single payer. And with these high deductibles that are simply meant to prevent insurance companies from having claims experience and increase their profits, they've actually created a consumer market, because patients that have $6,000 deductibles or $8,000 family deductibles or even higher, suddenly they're buying healthcare out of their own pocket. And people who spend their own money tend to shop, and they want to know, how much is this surgery or this mammogram going to be? And they want to know that number, and they want to know it up front. So thank God, the government never gets anything right. And they've created, in an attempt to push us to single payer, they've actually created a consumer market that has resulted in, just recently, University of California at Los Angeles has actually released a transparent pricing website, which is a completely plagiarized version of mine. And my web designers called me and said, call the lawyers. And I said, no, this is so flattering. This is cool. And St. Luke's health system in Pennsylvania has released a transparent pricing website, because more and more people are realizing that there's an increasing number of patients who are actually consumers in the marketplace. And this is not what the federal government had in mind, because as you have patients that actually have the sticker shock of their own bills, and you have competition, and then prices fall. That's not at all what all the cronies that were involved in Obamacare had in mind when they wrote this incredible, I guess you can call it a law.
This is great. I like it when my physicians are also anti-IP. Nice bonus. So that is certainly good news. And you talked about a visit to England recently. So England and Canada and much of the world has gone that way. You report that it's not the utopia some people think it is. Specifically, what did you observe there that led you to say that?
Well, I had a relative that was actually working in England and hadn't seen them for some time, and I'd never been to England. So my wife and I made a trip over there, and while I was there, this relative of mine invited me to just take a look into one of these clinics that is owned and operated by the National Health Service, about which I've written really some pretty provocative things, all of which are factual, and many of which are just links to articles that have come out of The Guardian in UK. And what I saw was what looked like a little bit like a clinic that you would see in a third world country. The paint looked like the color, kind of an off green that you would use in a prison. The furniture in there was plastic and was probably dated back in the 50s. It was just not it did not appear to be a clean. It was definitely overcrowded, and obviously not anything that any person in the United States would find acceptable, or any sort of medical clinic that people would patronize here in the United States if they had any choice at all. So it looked a lot like behind the Iron Curtain sort of a setup that you would expect when there is not any competition involved. It confirmed, just by looking at the clinic, had confirmed what I knew that the clinics likely would look like. And there's a privatization effort going on in all of these countries that have single payer, because the only way single payer can work from a budget standpoint is for some bureaucrat to actually ration services or to create long lines. So the Polish, some of the people in Poland are opening up private clinics in England so that people can actually get in to see a primary care doctor. And many of the primary care doctors are quitting. So all the countries that have single payer in spite of everything you see in the mainstream news media, all these countries are making privatization efforts to shore up the extent to which these systems have failed the people and the poor patients who live there. And of course, the United States is going the other direction, heading headlong toward, this failed system. I don't know any better example, that we put our prices online and the first patients that showed up were Canadians. But just inexplicably, those Canadian patients would always defend the Canadian healthcare system. I've never understood that. Even though they were here having surgery in Oklahoma City, they would still, in spite of the fact that they'd been so failed, they would defend that system.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I've engaged people in arguments like that. It makes no sense. What's I guess what's most revealing about your personal story is that this is England we're talking about. We're not talking about Cuba. We're not talking about some second rate. I mean, this used to be the financial capital of the world, the largest empire.
Yeah.
And what you're describing is horrendous. I'm sorry you don't have pictures to show us, because it sounds dreadful. And the way I would explain it, or the way I imagine it to be, is similar to like a rundown post office. Have you ever been into a post office where it's just run down? The lights, half the lights are off or burnt out. The blinds are all crooked and bent, and there's handwritten signs everywhere. It's filthy and dirty, boxes and paper everywhere. Just there's toll plazas that look the same way, just completely run down. Can you imagine having a surgical procedure in a place like that, or having your child born in a place like that? It's a sad state.
And the stories are too numerous to recount, but keep in mind that the primary care doctors in Great Britain are actually paid a bounty for every patient they can get to sign an agreement that releases the hospital where they might be admitted in the future from providing them life-saving care. So there's actually a document that physicians, I believe they're paid £25 or £50 each, and it's basically a bounty for patients that will agree to be euthanized rather than receive end-of-life care. And of course, the method they use is called the Liverpool Care Pathway, and it basically is a combination of heavy sedation and starvation. And all of these things, all this information is out there. There was the British National Health Service has agreed or has admitted to improperly euthanizing 250,000 people in, I believe it was a 2-year period. And it was scandalous, and then everybody moves on and says, yeah, but it's free. This is great. And so it's like nobody pays attention to these absolutely insane facts. But it's a disaster. I'd call it a third world setup. I'm reminded of Ludwig von Mises was actually in a meeting. The story I've been told, he was in a meeting with one of the popes one time, and the pope said to Mises, but there has to be a third way. There can't just be socialism or communism on one end and capitalism and free market on the other. There has to be a third way. And Mises said, yes, there is a third way, and it leads directly to the third world. And I think that people that entertain a compromise on the issue of property rights, that's where you end up. You end up in a clinic that looks like the one that I was standing in just recently.
That is absolutely tragic. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. It's just horrible. How are doctors handling this? I mean, most people that go into medicine, they certainly smart enough to do almost anything they want. They go into medicine because they want to help people. How are doctors reacting to this?
I don't personally know any physicians that are in the UK. I mean, I've read reports about the physicians in the UK that are actually leaving the practice of medicine. But you know what? That's the same type of government tyranny that rules in a single payer world. is raining down pretty hard on physicians here in the United States. And you look at, some of the latest problems that and barriers that physicians face, like ICD-10, or the fact that physicians that are employed by hospitals are paid more for the very same procedures or diagnoses related efforts than physicians that are in private practice. So physicians in the United States are retiring, and people are not going into medicine, and people that are doctors are here in the United States are finding other lines of work. So I think whether, if the government is involved, and when they are involved in healthcare, it tends to be a very tyrannical sort of environment. In Canada, surgeons are only allowed so much operating time in a hospital during the week. And when their time is gone, they can't operate anymore, and they go home or they go fishing. And many of them also have salary caps. So when they've earned that amount of money, even if it's 6 months into the year, then they're finished for the year. So anytime government gets involved, you see this misallocation of resources and rationing. And eventually, a lot of the physicians become disgruntled and just punch out and go do something else, or they leave the country and go somewhere else where they can work in a way that in a manner that's characterized as mutually beneficial exchange.
Yeah, and this is very sad going forward if you think about it, because one of the reasons, look at any society, any culture, one of the reasons that there's so much prestige around the practice and study of medicine, the reason why it pays so much is because we as society, we want our best and brightest there doing that job. But with the incentives or the counter incentives the way they are, fewer and fewer people are going to go into that field, don't you think?
Yeah, I think though the pendulum will swing pretty hard the other way, and I think it has begun. There is a real free market movement in medicine that is sweeping the United States, and this is really good news. I'd like to mention the Free Market Medical Association. It's an outfit that has grown very large and has members from all over the United States, and people that are embracing the principles of liberty and believe that healthcare does follow the law of economics, and that's a very good thing. I think primary care doctors in the United States are increasingly embracing either concierge practices or direct primary care (DPC) practices, and that's a very disruptive, very free market that encourage people to really keep their eye on the ball of the good news, because there's a lot of bad news, and it comes from the usual places. It comes from Washington, D.C. and from the bureaucrats. But the power of the market is so much more intense than the power of the pen of the legislator. And I don't see really I'm very optimistic, frankly, about healthcare in the United States. And I think a lot of medical students, particularly those at an outfit called the Benjamin Rush Institute, they really get this, and they understand that in order to have a sustainable practice and in order to have a very satisfying life as a physician, they have to embrace the principles and the discipline of the free market. And I'm actually very optimistic going forward what healthcare looks like in the United States.
That's good. I hope you're right. I was speaking with Joe Salerno of the Mises Institute recently. We were talking about the war on cash and what's going on around the world. And I likened banks, or the future of banks, as basically jail for money, where they try to get the money in there, get our payroll in there, and hold all the deposits and have all transactions take place electronically. Looks like in healthcare they're trying to turn hospitals into jail for patients and doctors, have all of the doctors employed by hospitals, have all of the patients receive all of their care in these government-run hospitals. Of course, the natural tendency is to stay out of jail. So you're saying that more and more doctors are seeking alternatives to working in those hospitals, and patients also are doing the same.
Yes, and physicians are all humans like everybody else. If you tell a doctor that I'm going to pay you a salary and you're going to come to work for this hospital, and what you make is no function of whether you actually provide good care or have patient satisfaction or whether you even come to work. then that physician very predictably is going to do precisely what you think he would do. He's going to go to the beach, he's going to go fishing, he's going to be unavailable, and he's going to be unproductive. So ultimately, these models where hospitals actually employ physicians result in just gross amounts of unproductivity, and they tend to be very unstable. And then rather than some carrot, the hospital walks around with a big stick. And of course, that's great for morale. And physicians need to be really self-employed. They don't really have any, they're not going to do well working for someone else. And I encourage patients, when you go see your doctor, ask them, who do you work for? Because if they work for the hospital, they invariably and inevitably will have some conflict where they're faced with what is right for this patient versus what does my boss, the hospital administrator, want me to do in this situation. So I see more and more doctors leaving their hospital employment. The hospitals are still on a buying spree, where they're buying all these practices, but I see that juggernaut really coming to a halt, and physicians are beginning to wake up and realize this is a horrible situation. I've got to get out of it.
Yeah, but it takes guts to do that, especially if you're established in the system, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Last time we spoke, you talked about the trend that you're seeing, and you alluded to it actually today as well, that there are copycats out there that since you decided to publish your prices on the open market, that people have discovered that this is a good thing to do, or they've decided that this is the only way that they can survive now that you've done it, and that there's a growing trend. You said that the flow of patients from Canada has slowed somewhat because of these places popping up in border states. But you also wrote recently that someone made the trip from Lima to Oklahoma City to have a procedure done, and I'm wondering why is that? Is this just someone, going for the Coke rather than the generic cola? Why did they come all the way to you rather than have that procedure in any of the numerous places they probably could have found between here and Peru?
Well, we're fortunate here in Oklahoma City to have really a world-class group of physicians and surgeons, and many of them work at my facility. There are a couple of places in the country where a very large number of cochlear implant surgeries just happens to be one of them. And the Surgery Center of Oklahoma is one of those places. So this fellow in Lima, Peru, excuse me, he needed or desired a cochlear implant, and we do a lot of those here. And unlike the so-called not-for-profit hospitals, we don't charge multiples of what that actual implant cost. We actually only charge what we pay for it. And right now the going price it's under $30,000 for the device, but many times the so-called not-for-profit hospitals will charge $90,000 or $100,000 or even more for this device. So we charge whatever the device costs, plus I think our website says $8,800. So for about $35,000, this guy could get a cochlear implant. Whereas if he went to any other place, he would have paid a lot more. Plus, he's got a world-class surgeon that does this surgery all the time, a very, very experienced surgeon. He saved so much money and had such a great experience that we fully expect him to return to have his other side done. In all likelihood, he'll have 2 cochlear implant surgeries for a fraction of what he would have paid for one anywhere else. So our website has a larger reach. And every day that goes by, I discover somebody else from far away. We've taken care of patients from Nigeria, Turkey, the UK. Now we've had someone from Peru. So that we're seeing patients from all over the place. And this creates competitive pressures. This is not something that the that say the medical tourist destinations in Costa Rica or Panama or Cuba want people to know about, because that puts a lot of pressure on their pricing. And that's a good thing, ultimately, for the consumer.
I want to touch on some financial topics. I'm wondering, because you now have an international audience for your services, are you being hurt at all by the strong dollar?
I don't think so. The gap between what we charge and our next best price, I always ask patients that, what was your next best price? And the gap between what we charge and what the next best price is typically is so large that the variations in currency values have not had really any effect on us. Of course, we accept Bitcoin, and we've been paid in all different manners. So I don't know that there's been any appreciable effect on us with currency changes.
Well, that's interesting. And I'm sure the folks at Walmart and Colgate-Palmolive are wishing they had your types of margins. I got one more question for you, and it relates to a comment you made about so-called nonprofits. I think we've covered that on other interviews before. But I read an article in a financial newsletter recently, and they're talking about the student loan crisis that's kind of barreling down on us. $1 trillion, I think it is, out there, and the government is scrambling to try to keep this thing from unraveling, as they usually do. So there's deferrals, right? People can defer payments by going to graduate school, pay what you can or something like that. There's all kinds of the typical types of subsidies, and ultimately culminating in some type of debt forgiveness, like complete forgiveness after, I don't know what it is, 10 years, maybe longer. The point of the article was interesting because to qualify for the forgiveness, you have to fall under one of 3 categories, I think. One of those categories was working for a nonprofit. And so the result of that is going to be, I suspect you have some very highly educated, very highly compensated surgeons or other physicians working at so-called nonprofits, being able to apply for debt forgiveness. Do you know about this? Is this true? Or is this a possibility even?
That's the first I've heard of it. I would not be at all surprised if that were the case, because the federal government has done everything they possibly can do deliberately to drive physicians coming right out of residency into the open arms of the big hospitals that want to hire them. So this would be just another on a long list of moves that very deliberately result in driving physicians away from being in private practice and being hospital employees. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Wow, yeah. So if you work for Dr. Keith Smith, you can take care of that several $100,000 loan bill by yourself. Come to us and we write it off.
Well, of course, I don't have any doctors that work for me. Everybody I work with is independent. They work for themselves. And we're very picky about who we let work at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, but students that see the surgeons who work here will know absolutely and for sure who their surgeon is working for. They're working for that patient.
Yeah, great point, great point. Okay, I guess with that I'll let you go, Dr. Smith, but I want to thank you for coming on again. It's always fun. Love to talk to you about medicine, but I also love to talk to you about other stuff. So I hope you'll come on again and we can continue the conversation.
I'll look forward to it. I'll come back anytime.
Keep up the good work on the blog.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My guest has been Dr. Keith Smith of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. Please visit him at surgerycenterok.com. That's where you'll find information about the Surgery Center, and also a link to Dr. Smith's video blog, which you don't want to miss. And don't forget to visit powerandmarket.com for insightful interviews with the world's leading experts in free market economics. This is the Power and Market Report. Until next time, take care.